Penguin Random House Audio presents The New Breadline, Hunger and Hope in the 21st Century. This is the author, Jean-Martin Bauer. To the Masters of the Dew. Timeo Danaos et dona ferentes. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Virgil, the Aeneid. Introduction. They're inside. They got over the wall. I can see them, Paul whispered to me over his phone. I heard him swallow hard. A heavy silence followed, and he hung up. A few months earlier, I had been appointed the World Food Programme's, WFP's, country director in Haiti. Paul, a Haitian agronomist, was the head of our office in Gonaïves. That September morning, we were losing the battle to save our office from a mob that had come to plunder the food stocks in our warehouse. Paul had just called to warn that attackers had breached our perimeter. Over the previous days, we had barricaded the compound after demonstrators tried to force their way in. We pleaded in vain with the police and local authorities to protect us. We even used a forklift to move a 20-foot-long shipping container across the main gate to reinforce it. That morning, the mob forced its way in. In the next hours, they vandalized our office, carried away all the food from our warehouse, and burned it to the ground. Footage of the fire went viral on social media. It showed dark pillars of smoke rising from our warehouse and crowds carrying away heavy bags of rice. I was disheartened, but not surprised, when I saw that Twitter accounts cheered on the destruction of humanitarian food stocks. That day, the attackers made off with enough food to feed 100,000 children. Although Paul was shaken, he was safe, as was the rest of our team in Gonaïves. In Haiti, not a single voice spoke out publicly against the attack. This was perhaps because people feared becoming targets themselves if they condemned the events. Whatever the reason, the silence testified to the climate of impunity in the country. The attack on the WFP warehouse occurred as the global food crisis took a turn for the worse. The Haitian people were suffering more than ever. Experts estimated that half of the country's population was facing acute hunger as food prices took off and as violence took hold in much of the country. In September 2022, violent demonstrations against la vie chère, the high cost of living, broke out. The worst riots since the fall of Jean-Claude Duvalier in 1986 shook the entire nation. Over several weeks, angry crowds targeted banks, supermarkets, government offices, and even humanitarian facilities. To the starving multitudes of Haiti, stocks of humanitarian supplies were fair game, regardless of the consequences for their community's schoolchildren. It's easy to imagine desperate citizens justifiably looting a warehouse with idle stocks of surplus relief items. This was not the case in the attacks we suffered in September 2022. The men and women who attacked us had been manipulated, egged on through slogans that spread like wildfire over FM radios and WhatsApp. Hunger left people open to manipulation and receptive to their worst instincts. Suffering citizens turned into brazen rioters. Being a humanitarian worker in Haiti has long meant being treated with skepticism by the local people. By 2022, we had become targets, facing the open hostility of the communities we were meant to help. How are we supposed to fight hunger when the people we're meant to help turn on us? The sacking of the WFP warehouse in Gonaïves hit me like a gut punch. It felt personal because my mother was born in Haiti. As a teenager, she had left the troubled country for the United States, where I was born and raised. I joined WFP in 2001, right after college, and spent my early career managing food programs in the West African Sahel, a front line in the fight against global hunger. During the early part of my career, I planned food distributions to poor communities with our local partners. I purchased food at local markets and negotiated logistics with trucking companies. I also monitored projects to ensure food got to the intended beneficiaries. It was a demanding task that my energetic and curious young self embraced. In 2008, I became an analyst. For the next decade, the role brought me to Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, Syria, and many other war-torn countries. I wrangled data about crops, food markets, and family-level dynamics. I explained the stories the numbers told to other humanitarians. In doing so, I became intimate with the systems that create and sustain acute hunger in the most fragile parts of the world. When I was assigned to lead WFP's office in Haiti in 2022, I was both enthusiastic and uneasy about what I'd find. When I got off the plane, I was saddened to see that broad, sandy gullies now scarred the once green mountains that ring Port-au-Prince. It looked like the island was well on its way to becoming a Sahel in the Caribbean. The land was badly wounded, and that was the least of it. Port-au-Prince was in the throes of an undeclared civil war. Heavily armed gangs were vying for territory, killing and maiming countless civilians. Ruelle Vague, the quiet, middle-class street where my mother had grown up in the 1950s, was now a no-go area, one that the neighborhood militia periodically barricaded to keep the gangs at bay. Millions of Haitians had been plunged into hunger as armed men cut off supply lines. Farmers could not bring their produce to the market. Food prices spiraled upward, making essentials unaffordable to many. People had seen all this before, and it seemed to me there was a fatalism in their attitude. Far from a relic of a bygone era, hunger remains an everyday ritual for millions of Haitians. We're Haitian. We're used to hunger, a young mother told me softly in Cité Soleil, a seaside slum. It's not just Haiti. All over the world, hunger has proven hard to beat. Believe it or not, for a moment at the turn of the millennium, it seemed the world was winning the battle against hunger. Famines had been virtually eliminated. As technology advanced and as government programs reached more people than ever, deaths from starvation fell sharply in the second half of the 20th century. Trends were so encouraging that in 2015, the world's governments publicly committed to eliminating hunger by 2030. But instead of being eradicated, hunger has surged because of escalating global food prices, even as conflict and climate change continue to decimate livelihoods. Experts estimated that in 2023, more than 250 million people would be facing acute hunger, double the number in 2020. What was long regarded as a problem facing only the poorest nations is now pressing in on us here in the United States, where more than 13 million families are food insecure. During the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw in the news the snaking lines at food banks around the country after millions of people lost their jobs. Even generous government aid was not enough to stop hunger from rising among minority groups in America, a fact that reminds us that all over the world, hunger is the outcome of deep-rooted social inequality. There's plenty of food in the world to feed everyone. And yet, even in a country like the United States, endowed with abundant food supplies, people don't have enough food to eat. This paradox can be explained only by our society's deep structural inequalities and the shortcomings of our systems of production and distribution. In other parts of the world, conflict and corruption are added to the mix. But if, as has been said, hunger is a political condition, then it is, like all political conditions, something we can change. Political systems can exacerbate or drive hunger by disenfranchising a society's most vulnerable group. The Heretian caste of formerly enslaved people in Moorish society, landless farmers of the arid Sahel, or indigenous people of Central Africa's rainforests. And when a food crisis strikes, the population at large also suffers. Nobel economist Amartya Sen argued that the most extreme food shortages have almost always been the result of rulers' neglect and indifference to the plight of their people. No famine has ever taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy, he wrote in 1991. The current crisis should motivate us to reassess our food production and distribution systems, as well as our social safety net. To stanch hunger's worldwide resurgence, we need to think big and think differently about the causes of hunger and famine and how to combat them more effectively. Those of us working in the humanitarian space can improve aid delivery by, for example, embracing emerging technologies, digital payments, robotics, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence, and other disruptive developments that promise to produce more food with less waste and enable food deliveries in high-risk settings. Technology, as we know, is a double-edged sword, and our use of these systems will require care, but their potential is undeniable. Technology alone won't solve our problems. In the war against hunger, it is people who use the tech, who make the decisions and perpetuate or disrupt hierarchies and inequality. From America's inner cities to refugee camps in various countries, food programs involve unequal power relations between those who provide aid and those who receive it. Inequality is often embedded by race and colonial histories. Even as workforces of humanitarian agencies have become increasingly diverse, it has remained taboo to discuss the racial dynamics shaping aid delivery.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?